Good evening. I'm Ali Giorsi, the founder of the Foodshed Network. And on behalf of myself and my colleague, Sarah Caccaro, the Conservation Resource Manager for Greenwich Conservation Commission, we welcome you to the inaugural Greenwich Food System Forum 2022. We extend a particularly warm welcome to our panelists who are generously donating their time this evening, and we thank our community partners for their promotional support. Their logos are noted on the screen here. We encourage you to go to the Greenwich Food System Forum webpage, where their websites are linked to their logo, and please explore all the incredible work being done. They've been incredible supports. So a few housekeeping items. We're going to first hear from our panelists and encourage questions towards the end. This presentation will be recorded and posted on the Foodshed Network website. For all of those who registered, will receive a follow-up email, including related resources. This is a meeting format, but please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're from and why you're here. And sign up for the Foodshed Times to receive invitations for upcoming webinars for the Greenwich Food System Forum, Cultivating Connecticut by Land on May 4th, and Cultivating Connecticut Grown by Sea on June 1st. And the links will be in the chat, and registration will be live on Friday for the May Forum. So we acknowledge that this region in which we reside, referred to as Connecticut, is located on the unceded traditional lands and waters of Indigenous people, and that we have a responsibility to help make that truth visible and to support efforts towards Indigenous sovereignty and well-being. This acknowledgement is a first step in recognizing the harm done and moving towards solidarity with Indigenous people. We are fortunate to have Jeremy Whipple and Cassius Spears from the Mashantucket Pequot Nation with us this evening, as they will offer their valuable knowledge and perspective. The Greenwich Food System Forum is a 6-part series that will engage Connecticut thought leaders on questions such as, in what ways does food production intersect with our greatest social and ecological challenges? What role does systemic injustices play in health, economic, gender, and racial disparities? How do agroecological principles and practices rooted in Indigenous wisdom contribute to solutions? What does regionalization and regeneration rooted in Indigenous wisdom what does regionalization and regeneration look like within the context of a complex global food network? And what can we do to mitigate harm as we creatively and thoughtfully heal? We hope to catalyze more awareness and engagement around our collective values and a vision for a food community culture in Greenwich and Connecticut. And we'll hear more from Meg Horrigan later this evening on what is happening on a state level in that regard. The industrialized food system would not function if it did not exploit land, water, animals, labor, and other natural resources. Consequences of the get big or get out agricultural principle is the erosion of soil, nutrients, ecosystems, an unconscionable amount of food loss and waste, while 10.5% of our population is food insecure. And although this extraordinary complex system does get food on the table, it does a lot of harm along the way. According to the United Nations, and I quote, the term food systems was mentioned 240 times in the UN IPCC's latest report, Climate Change 2022, Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability. This is a stark warning and reminder that food systems transformation is instrumental to achieving the global goals of human rights, equality, and climate change. We are here this evening to better understand the gravity of this dominant system and also how we have the power to be food systems change makers. Good, clean food which moves through a fair and regionalized system from seed back to soil or sea, has the potential to repair the fabric of our respective food cultures, stitched with justice, beauty, and nourishment for every individual and our planet. So we are so happy you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Caccaro, who will speak to this evening's panel.
Thank you, Allie, and good evening, everyone. I'm grateful to be here tonight and to co-host the Greenwich Food System Forum. Tonight's panel, the Industrialized Food System, Equity, Regionalization, and Regeneration, was designed to offer context and to set the foundation for the forum. Generally speaking, sustainable food system advocacy is not fully understood. Although many people may buy organic, shop at the farmer's market, or compost, they do not necessarily appreciate their actions as part of a larger ecosystem of solutions in response to a dysfunctional food system, which is compounded with layers of confusing and conflicting messaging. This evening's discussion will begin to make those important connections more clear. Food is a basic need and one of life's greatest pleasures. It is a way to connect with each other, express love and creativity, and everyone has the right to easily and affordably access fresh food. Although there are significant sustainability initiatives in Greenwich, I've also seen that there are gaps and we can fulfill the needs throughout the community. We can do more to collaborate with other Connecticut municipalities working to grow food through school gardens, farm to school, and urban farms. Through my role coordinating Greenwich's Sustainable Connecticut certification, I have learned the importance of healthy food networks on a municipal and state level. We hope this evening will foster more supportive partnerships between Greenwich and other Connecticut food systems changemakers. Our panelists this evening are thought leaders doing exemplary work in Connecticut to transform our food system, inspire hope, and provide pathways for action. Ellie and I had the opportunity to meet with each one of our panelists in preparation for this evening, and I guarantee you will be inspired as we were. Thank you again for being here and enjoy the discussion.
Great. So in light of time, we are not going to, I'm not going to offer bios. But we do encourage you to please go to the Greenwich Food System website and explore all the incredible work that our panelists have done to get where they are today. So our first speaker this evening is Jeremy Whipple, the Executive Director of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, Department of Agriculture, responsible for carrying out the mission and strategic goals of the tribe's agricultural development initiatives, providing oversight of agricultural operations and all related policy implementation. We're going to start with a short video about the collaboration between the Mashantucket Pequot Nation and Yukon, and then we'll hear from Jeremy.
The healthier we are, the stronger we are.
The partnership with Yukon has made the tribe stronger. It's definitely refocused our attention towards farming and healthier eating. The good thing about Yukon is they're eager to teach and they're equally eager to learn. So we've been able to work with them to ensure that some of our traditional protocols and actual farming techniques have been a cornerstone to this project.
With the grant, that's helped us bring back a lot of traditional ceremonies because we're able to grow these things with the money that we didn't potentially have before that the grant has offered us.
We've been able to tap into the children, get them educated.
You know, it's just a good example for the younger generation to see. So that's what makes me proud.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay, how you guys doing? So, a little video you did is that you just seen is a collaboration we got with UConn through the FERTAP grant that we got through the USDA, and which has helped us lead up to creating the Department of Agriculture and helping the tribe become more sustainable and doing it with a less carbon footprint. And that's been our main focus. And with the new department, I've hired Cassius Spears, who's a Narragansett. He's my farm manager running my greenhouse operations. And he's going to be talking a little more about the food sovereignty part of it in the PowerPoint when he presents. So yeah, basically the tribe is, we just want to grow our own food and be sustainable and pass it on to the future generations. That's our main goal right now, and offer help to anybody in Connecticut or in the area with you know, our culture and our past and what we know about gardening and stuff like that. We want to pass down our traditions. So, and we'll let Cassius talk a little more about the food sovereignty part of it, which will I be able to chime in and out as he's talking?
I think so. I think that should be doable. Jess can help us with that. So if it's easier for both of you to kind of toggle back and forth, then that's absolutely fine. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so let me introduce Cassius, and then the two of you can share the space. So Cassius Spears is the farm manager at the Mashantucket Pequot Nation Department of Agriculture and the founder and director of the Narragansett Food Sovereignty Initiative, as well as the president of Rhode Island Association Conservation District. So welcome, Cassius.
Thank you. I'm going to put a quick PowerPoint slide up. Okay, so when you're talking about food sovereignty in indigenous perspective, it's yes, there are words. We talk about food security, food control, a sustainable ecosystem, but it's something that indigenous people have been practicing and been doing for a long time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what guides us. And of course, food tells us so much about who we are. And what I mean by that is that, you know, let's start with geography. You know, it tells you about your water quality, your soil quality, your climate, how much daylight time, or how long your growing season is. And it's just, it kind of describes your environment, and in our case, our home. And if you take the time and research about, or research some of your grandmother's old recipes, you know, and ask questions about how they come about and why, you'll find that, again, it will tell you a little bit about your history and maybe even includes some of the culture that's involved.
Cassius,
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's Jess. My apologies. We actually can't see your PowerPoint slides.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah, apologies. If you may need to come out of the PowerPoint slides from the full screen and then click the share screen again.
And we will try this really quickly. Okay. Okay, how's that? Can everyone see the screen?
Still can't see it. Did you click the share screen and then select the PowerPoint slides and then share?
Did. Let me try this one more time.
Sorry, everybody. It did work when we trialed it a few minutes ago.
So I'm gonna push, let me select share screen.
Mhm.
Then I'm gonna select PowerPoint level 4.
Yep, and then that share button on the bottom, well, the bottom right of the screen that's pulled up.
Go ahead, try that.
There we go. Perfect. Yep. Thanks so much.
Okay, sorry about that. All right,
problem.
so again, I'm just going to go through these slides and try to speed this up a little bit. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the indigenous food system and its model, and I want to again talk a little bit about what food means to us, and it's in the environment. And like I was saying, it's a who we are. We're so connected with the land that we use, and the food which we call gifts of the land, that the land provides. That it's our songs, our stories, our celebrations, expressions all come from this. So that's why I say that food tells us a lot about who we are. And like I mentioned earlier, it also describes your location as well. If you look into this slide here, you'll see, this is, of course, it's pre-contact, but you'll see everything is from the natural world. And again, it's always have been in our view of life. It's always been community based. It's been teachings, and not teachings just between each other, but also learning from the plant world and the animal world. And we actually kind of put ourselves on the bottom of the totem pole, I should say, because we feel in our humbleness, because we feel that our existence and our survival was by watching the animals and learning, from their actions. So this is a picture of a community coming together to growing a corn, a flint corn that we as indigenous people grow in this area, which has been manipulated by our ancestors for generations to actually grow healthy in this environment and grow. And you can see how tall and strong it is. So when we see this corn not growing, we know how depleted and how poor the land is, and that it's time for us to give back. This particular picture here, a lot of times we don't use food, corn. In this picture, I should say, corn wasn't grown as food, it was grown as a medicine. And what I mean by that is that we grew the first portion of a field of corn, which was probably the first time it was grown in a community setting for over 250 years. We've grown corn in our own individual gardens, but as a community, we grew it this time. And instead of eating the corn, we actually gave the corn away to other indigenous people, other tribal members, to bring them in the following spring to replant. So our fields of corn grows as a community grows. So it's a community builder. And that's what I mean by using it as a medicine instead of as a food. And you also see that the tools and techniques and the stories and the lessons learned, the educational part of relating to our food. Again, I mentioned earlier about how it's so connected to us and who we are. We don't separate ourselves from it. Our expressions, our dance, our songs, our ceremonies, our calendar is all based around our food and our food system and the healthy ecosystem. So it's really important to us to have that food control and that food security, because without that, it's not something that we can say, well, we can do without. It's who we are again, and without that, we actually lose our identity. So that's why we fight so hard to keep this alive within our communities and, of course, to the next generations. If you live here in the East Coast, you'll know the different types of shellfishing. Again, when I look at that, I can see a calendar in front of me to different times a year that we gather different types of seafood, knowing their migration periods, knowing where they live, the environment, the type of salinity, the water in the water. Also, I can look at this picture and I can tell you that the blue shell crabs here are all females, because we in our way of conservation, the indigenous community knows not to to throw away, male crabs, to let go all the female crabs and keep all the male crabs, and it's just something that we take for granted in our community that everybody knows, but unless we express this, you would have to come and actually live with us and just see that our habits and the way we do things and how we conserve in that manner for the next generations. And and I mentioned earlier about the animal world is who we learn from, and we make sure that there's always enough food left behind, or left, I should say, for the animals. In other words, we don't deplete everything over harvest. We realize that we're sharing this space, and so this slide here just shows how important that is to us to value. We call the animals our brothers in the sister world, the plant world our sister, and we put the value and respect there as so. And then a quick slide of we don't like to get caught up in the scenario of when Thanksgiving time is the indigenous time, and you're looking for the moccasins and the breechcloths, and you get kind of caught in that time capsule. So we also have a lot of traditional knowledge, but we blend that in with the technology and the knowledge of today, and we try to use the best of that for what we're doing. We still plant in mounds because it's the more soil surface to heat up by the sun. Also, the frost drops a little lower in the mound, so we can extend our growing season. And of course, the heat in the soil helps germinate the plants easier. And I talked a little bit about expression. This is artwork that's showing a strawberry Thanksgiving, and which is a mother plant. It's a female plant, and we believe that this plant has a spirit, and this spirit is so powerful. I mean, it's a plant that flowers and fruits at the same time. The berry is shaped like a heart. The vines are all interconnected. You see generations on the same plant, so it's a very powerful plant. And if Jeremy and I had all our family here and we talked to our aunties, every time they would tell us a little bit more information about this plant and how mysterious it is. And then the medicine woman of the tribe, we could even go into depth on the medicinal values of this plant. So again, putting that into an art form and expression is really important to us, and to the point where we actually have a strawberry Thanksgiving, because it is the first berry of the year that we pick and harvest, and that brings the community together out of a long, cold winter. As well as the three sisters teaching another lesson, the companion planting. You have the three sisters, corn, bean, and squash, which way they help each other, keeping moisture in the soil, bean taking nitrogen out of the air, putting into the soil for the corn. Maybe that's why the corn is so tall. She helps the bean wrap off the ground by letting her wrap around the stalk. Again, a lot of lessons and expression, and I'm just trying to express here how we are, food is connected to us deeply, and our environment is so connected to us that it is our existence. It's a couple of quick slides of some of the things that we grow and do. And again, working with children, harvesting and foraging in this slide here. And some of the produce, you can almost see the artwork and just in the colors and the expression that goes along with that and the smile. So just want to, picture says 1,000 words, just want to show a few of these pictures. And why do? We do it for the next generation, and we have to keep this going. So it's really important for us to work with policy, but to help. I totally believe that, Indigenous people were lacking when it was time for all these policy making. So in today's world, our time, Jeremy and I put ourselves on the table, or seat ourselves at that table to help change the policy, to help direct the importance of food security, food control, and talk about the importance of the environment and clean water and clean air and what it means to us, and help change some of this that can benefit Indigenous people throughout the nation. So it's that important, and that was a quick spiel. There's a lot more in depth, but we're limited on time, and I just wanted to share that. And I'll go back to a full circle and show you the last slide where it says food tells us so much about who we are. So thank you very much.
Jeremy, did you want to add anything or?
Yeah,
Still
I
have a
just
few
wanted to
minutes.
add, recently we just had, speaking of the Thanksgiving and stuff, we just recently had our maple harvest Thanksgiving, because we make a lot of maple syrup here on the reservation. So I just wanted to, bring that up. So, because we try to practice every Thanksgiving possible, every harvest moon. So strawberry harvest moon, syrup harvest moon. So those Thanksgivings mean a lot to our community. And like Cassius said, it's all about the 7 generations and passing it down, leaving behind, stuff for the future generations, so this stuff don't get forgotten, which it can be forgotten very fast in this world today with all the technology. There's a lot of distractions. So people like us, we try to keep that focus on the food and everything else. So I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing and supporting us, what we're doing.
Yeah, and with food systems work, it's often very intellectualized, right, and kind of disembodied, and in our heads. And what an incredible testament to food and its talk about interrelated connection to the earth, to our ancestors, and obviously to your culture. So thank you for your work and all you do to keep that alive for future generations. So we'll come back towards the end.
And I just
Yeah,
want to,
please.
one more thing is, Jeremy, they do a green corn Thanksgiving. That's Skimitzin every year.
Yeah. Thank
Again,
you for bringing.
yeah. So these, and again, that's why I say you kind of got to come with us and live with us or be around us, because, this is just things that we do, and something as big as Skimitzin, it to us is it's again, identifies who we are, and it's so important to keep these things going. And if you haven't had a chance to come to Skimitzin, what are the dates on that, Jeremy?
August 28th and 29th.
Okay, we'll include that in our follow-up.
Thank you.
And I also want to just mention, go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing too, is like, a lot of things that we've been practicing, we're all in this together, and I think working as a team, we can accomplish a lot more than trying to do everything on our own. And I think working together, sharing our different needs and stuff like that, we can really help each other and help the future generation of our kids move on and be better people and learn how to live and nourish each other.
So if you want to add to that, what Jeremy's saying, we can leave, I guess we can end at this on Jeremy, progress moves at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we learn to trust by being together and building those relationships and really taking time to listen and learn. And on that note, if anyone who's here tonight hasn't had a chance to visit the Mashantucket Pequot Nation Museum, it is just one of the treasures of our state. I went there, expecting to, pass in and out. And I think I was there for 3.5 hours, and I went back a couple months later. It's just really an extraordinary, gem and true, testament to the history of our state. So thank you both. And we look forward to reconnecting towards the end here with questions. I'm sure we'll have questions. So.
Thank you for having us.
Yep, thank you. So our next speaker is Kip Kolsinskis, and I recently learned that Kip's nickname is Mr. Soils. And Kip is a solid ground professional, soil conservation and land use consultant. Kip's major clients include the University of Connecticut Extension, American Farmland Trust, the Connecticut Department of Agriculture, Connecticut Farmland Trust, and the North Central Conservation District. So it's an honor to have you here, Kip. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute. And again, to have these conversations, they're long overdue, and we all have something to offer. And again, I think that was a great way to start, because really, I think the goal is sustainability, to keep Mother Earth alive, because I'm not interested in finding another planet. I want to keep this one alive for all species. So, and again, as a soil scientist, I appreciate the comments that were made about the using mounds as planting beds. Yeah, really touched on some really important points there. So I have the task of talking about some things that we've done wrong and we can do better. So try not to get you too depressed, but there is hope. Again, there were some nice slides of rainbows, and I've got some rainbows. So we know that there's brightness after the storm. So let me go through this. So again, with the industrialization of the food system, the result of the Green Revolution in the 60s, that we were going to feed the world. And again, not really thinking about all of the, some of them certainly were intended consequences, but a lot of unintended consequences. So really what's happened is it was built for maximizing scale and efficiency at low initial cost, but not really much about the effectiveness for healthy food for all people. And it was based on cheap fossil fuels. And we know that we don't have cheap fossil fuels anymore. It was extraction of resources, aggregation of land ownership and management. And again, as we know, a lot of stolen land from indigenous people, and aggregation of processing, storage, and transport requires cheap labor, human control and taming of nature rather than working with nature. And so it produced inexpensive food, but it externalized a lot of the real costs and the consequences. So let's look at that in a little more detail. And again, the thing that I would say is that as we look at the food system across the world, every decision from now on, we need to think of climate change, of any decision that we make. How is this impacted by climate change? How is it going to impact our ability to mitigate and adapt and build resiliency? And so these are all things that are interrelated, which again makes this to be a really challenging, or what's called a wicked problem. So again, we have the globalization of everything. So, you know, at the same time that we have climate change, we have pests and diseases that are coming here from other parts of the world. And we have access to foods from other parts of the world. We're in this transition from a fossil fuel economy to renewables. We have a scarcity of resources right now, you know, with our reliance on applied phosphorus and potassium. There are really few areas where they can still be mined in the world, controlled by a few nations. We have the challenge of how do we feed 9.5 to 10 billion people by 2050. You know, that it has been said that if we just reduced our food waste and redistributed our system, that we could easily feed 10 billion people. So how would we make that happen? The threat of urbanization. So the fact that if you think about where our cities are, most of where our cities are, they were either on the coast because of coastal resources, or they were where rivers converge, where we had the best farmland. And that's where we also have these mega cities that are gobbling up some of our best farmland that's the most resilient to the impacts of climate change. We have technology, which is technology can be helpful, technology can be hurtful. And again, as we're seeing right now, the impact of geopolitics, war, peace, and pandemics, of the impact that COVID had on our food system, that of what the impact of the loss of the grain belt in Russia and Ukraine is going to have on the world's food supply, particularly in the Middle East and in Africa, which rely on those soil resources and those plants. And then the impacts of culture, religion, ethics, value, economics, and then the legacy of the impacts of all of our current systems. So there's a lot of challenges here, a lot of things to think about. And then Ali and Sarah asked me to talk about some of the bad and the ugly and the impacts of the. Oh, let me just go back one thing. The other thing that I didn't, and certainly I was reminded that one thing that's missing from this food system is impacted by is, again, as was mentioned, the geography, the ecosystems, the climate and the soils, that there are places where you can grow certain things and other places you can't. When people talk about, well, you know, if we didn't eat meat, you know, we'd be able to feed a lot more people. The reality is there are portions of the planet, because of the climate and the soils and the ecosystems, they're meant to have grazing animals. You can't grow row crops in those areas. So that all those things need to be considered. So again, some of the impacts of the current industrialized food system we've had of polluted runoff. You look at the hypoxia in the Gulf is a consequence of the corn soybean belt and of excess nutrients and sediments, the loss of natural areas, biodiversities, of rainforests being cleared for cattle production, for fast food, polluted groundwater, overused groundwater. We have areas in the Southwest, which is in a mega drought, that they're mining ancient groundwater that will take hundreds, if not thousands of years to be recharged. Contamination, rise of antibiotic resistance. When you have animal housing that has thousands and thousands of animals, antibiotics are used to keep them healthy. We know that that's created antibiotic resistance. We know that part of our climate change emissions is from methane, from petroleum-based fertilizers, from the transportation and carbon loss from how agriculture has been managed, impacts animal welfare, food waste, highly processed food, decline of rural communities, reduced food security, environmental justice, impacts on women and children. Women are around the world are often the farmers that are impacted by some of these changes in the food system. Consolidation of land ownership and business, and then loss of diversity of varieties, breeds, cultural practices, and local knowledge. So some of the genetic information that we need to be more resilient in changing climate, we've lost, or that corporations have taken some of that genetic material and have patented it and are suing indigenous people for saving seeds and using them. So that's some of the bad and the ugly. So again, I know Ali and Sarah know I can't resist of talking about climate change. Again, this is a slide that I really like, of that everything changes. We need to change everything if we're going to have resilience in the face of changing climate, of what we eat, where we farm, how we distribute food, how we use our water. And in some places, it's going to be too hot and too dry or too wet to have agriculture be successful and to be able to have farm workers and farmers out there. So again, we're fortunate in the Northeast that we will have, when we look at regional systems and the strength of regional systems that are going to be more resilient in the face of climate change, that we're actually going to be one of the few regions that's going to have adequate water, sometimes too much, sometimes not enough, and a temperature that's going to be suitable for many forms of agriculture. So how, as a region, can we develop the resiliency and have the food justice and security that we need, and protect our ecosystems? And also, again, we can't, not that soil erosion isn't a threat and soil health isn't a threat, and though the biggest threat is the loss of our best agricultural land. This is showing some work that American Farmland Trust did of 31 million acres of farmland lost in the last 20 years. So when you see communities that are concerned, like South Windsor, there was an article in the Current about all the land, prime farmland, that's being lost to Amazon warehouses. That's a legitimate concern. It's not just a NIMBY, that those soils are most resilient to the impacts of climate change. So we're just throwing them away by not really thinking about their value, and that agriculture is a legitimate land use and should be considered highest and best use in some areas. So as an example of one of the impacts of the food system, I'm going to take one example. So because you probably haven't heard enough acronyms yet. So a CAFO is a concentrated animal feeding operation. That's something that USDA and EPA use to look at where you have densities of animals. So a CAFO is animal units, where you have 1,000 or more animal units. One animal unit is a 1,000-pound animal. So if you look at this map where you have the density by county, so you have areas of this country, like again, if you look at, and can you see my cursor moving? So if you look in Southern California here, you see all this purple, this darker color. So that relates to, you have 138 to 300, over 300 of these 1,000 animal units. So what those are large dairies. Those are dairies that may have 3,000 to 10,000 animals on them. So they're producing as much waste as a city. So how do you safely manage that waste so that it can be used by plants, that you have healthy animals, that you're using the water and the soil wisely? And actually, because of the drought, some of these large dairies are moving up into Idaho, where there's more water and a better climate for dairy cattle. So wherever you see the darker the color, that means that there's more concentration of these feedlots, of large dairies. In the upper Midwest, that's beef feedlots, that's hogs, that's large dairies, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Down in the South, these are large chicken operations. Over here in kind of the coastal Carolinas, those are hog operations. Up in Virginia, the Delmarva Peninsula, those are chicken operations. So again, that's the current food system. And then you have, probably 4 large meat processors, and there's probably only 30 companies that control most of the poultry operations in the United States. And they contract out to over 100,000 farmers to be responsible for, as basically like contractors. And they have all the risk associated with those chicken operations and managing the manure and get very little of the profits. So if we were to reimagine a different food system where you don't have such large concentrations, then you're less likely to have the air quality problems and the groundwater pollution and the surface water pollution, and of more meat processors. And as again, if with less meat, and have agriculture, animal agriculture spread out more in some of these areas, that you'd have fewer environmental impacts. So this is just one example as relates to animal agriculture of this concentration of animals, of money, of power, of the impact that is having. And though we do know where we do have concentrations of animals that we can do better, that we have some conservation techniques that we can use that can reduce emissions, such as an anaerobic digester, taking that methane, which is a really a substance that from a climate change is really bad, and that we can collect that, and we can turn it into a fuel source, and that we can inject manure into the ground when plants can use it, rather than have it run off or leach, and when it's applied to a soil test. And though a piece of equipment like this is expensive, with the tanker that brings the liquid manure, and then the tractor and the equipment to put it into the ground, you're talking over $150,000. So it's some of these practices, for as marginal as agriculture is as a business, they're really expensive for some of these techniques. And though, again, if we have smaller operations that are more, you hear the term regenerative agriculture, and regenerative agriculture means you're working more with nature, natural systems, such as having smaller dairies that are more spread out with grazing plans and rotational grazing, beef operations as well, creating compost operations to safely store and use manure and food waste, and then reapply it for crops when they can use it. So we do know about some of these techniques. This is Jamie Jones. Some of you may have been to Jones Family Farms, and he's standing in a field of sorghum, and sorghum puts out a lot of biomass. So the Joneses use that. Let me turn that off. Use that to keep organic matter into the soil, reduce runoff, and supply nutrients to the plant. So we do know some of these techniques, and there's plenty of things that we can all do. So again, here's a list. I'll just talk about a few of those. There is technology that can be helpful. Some of it as far as, even in a greenhouse, to make sure it's not getting too hot, so your plants don't get cooked when the sun is hot, and that the fans go on. So some of it is inexpensive. Some of it, like weather data, can be really helpful to all of us. And we need to support the investments in climate change, climate smart and regenerative agricultural practices, and invest in land succession, so the next generation can get access to the land, reparations, and access to farmland for new and beginning farmers and BIPOC farmers. And then use incentives and disincentives. So why should we be developing on green fields when our state is covered over in gray fields and brown fields? Lots of things we can all do. Support our federal, state representatives who want to address the issues, reduce food waste, recycle. A bunch of these things are things that Ali already mentioned. We need better land use planning, and we need to conserve and reuse as much as possible. one of the things that I really like is principles of the Earth Charter, and I'll certainly send that information along as far as resources. And I know that there really was, that's something that has, as far as the history of the Earth Charter, came out of some work that was done in the 80s and through the UN and some other efforts. And I know that there were indigenous voices that were part of those conversations for developing those 16 principles of the Earth Charter. And again, just a couple of things of some things that relate to helping farmers afford these climate smart practices. There's actually, and restore land, bringing it back into production. There's Senate Bill 243. You could certainly ask your representatives to sign on to that bill. And then House Bill 5296, which is an act concerning open space and watershed acquisition program for protecting natural areas, protecting farmland, and also for putting money into the community garden program, which there's certainly many beginning farmers in the state have started farming in community gardens and community farms in this state. So, and you know, people might not know this, but for every 100 presentations that are given, you have to mention Mark Twain at least once. So I did find a Mark Twain quote here that was suitable. So the secret of getting started is to break complex, overwhelming tasks into small, manageable tasks, and then starting on the first one. And then the other is, which is kind of a Mark Twainish thing, is that changing the food system is a wicked problem, and the devil really is in the details. So it seems like something Mark Twain might say. And again, it's all about keeping Mother Earth and all the species alive and working together. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all and listen and learn. And there's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Kip. That was just excellent. That was excellent. And we look forward to re-engaging with questions. And I just have to say that map of the concentration of CAFOs was really powerful, right? I mean, you can really visualize it. And therein lies, you know, as you say, you know, a lot of power and imbalance there. So, and the other thing actually was interesting is how in the 90s, you know, Walmart was the big, you know, sort of predator of farmland, and here we are with Amazon. So I guess we didn't learn, but we will. So our next speaker is Teresa Rangel. Teresa is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Naugatuck, Connecticut. She is a former school principal with a passion for creating sustainable change. Under Rangel's leadership, Tracy Magnet School in Norwalk became the 2019 National Blue Ribbon recipient and a certified national school charter. Teresa, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you.
I am extremely happy to be here, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak and talk to you. As I was listening to Jeremy and Cassius and Kip talk, I was thinking about all the intersectionality that we have going on when it comes to education and you know, the next generation and what we need them to know and how we need them to grow in their knowledge in order to better help and support the work that we do. So it was really exciting to hear. So my role, currently I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in Naugatuck, and really a big part of what I do is I take a look at every system that we have, not just in the school system, but as well in the borough of Naugatuck, and I look for who's doing well, who's being left behind, are we including stakeholders in our decisions and the choices that we make, and are we including them from the beginning and not as an afterthought, and are we giving all of our students and our community members equitable access to support that will give them in return an equal opportunity to have a good life. And so that's a huge job. And, previous to doing this work, I kind of lived another passion, which was being a school principal, an elementary school principal in Norwalk. And part of that passion was really steeped in this idea of equity and what does that look like. And I started my journey in Norwalk at Tracy Elementary School at the time. And there's Prenty, the school mascot, in Tracy. And I have to tell you the kind of a little bit about the story of Tracy. So when I came to Tracy in 2015, there was a lot going on, and not much of it was good. Here's the irony. The staff was extremely happy. It was very much a family environment. The kids were happy, but there were some weird things happening for me, a new principal walking in the door. So first of all, we had 78% of our students were free reduced lunch, which had been a drastic change from the demographics that were there previously in the last 10, 20 years before then. Score-wise, for how kids were doing academically, they were consistently low performing, C minus pretty much at best. And that, of course, part of that shift happened when we moved away from CMTs and went into SBACs, which was a really an assessment that really is assessing your ability to make connections and build and grow ideas and not just do the basic calculations, which is how it had been formulated before. And there were a lot of what we would call negative behaviors, lots of punitive discipline, suspensions, you name it. And so, there was this real weird dichotomy of you have, staff that feels good about the school and they're feeling good, families that were kind of okay with it. But there was definitely a lack of equity in who was being successful, and how that was, what your outcomes would be, right? If you were a Tracy student, what your end result would be by the time you finished and left to move on to middle school, varied very much based on your socioeconomic status, what your first language you spoke, and that became a real big, obviously a big issue, right, for what we would like to see for our students. And so we started working together, the staff and I, on okay, how do we change the outcome for our students? Because at the end of the day, the adults can't be happy if we're not being successful in what we want for kids and really wanting to look at the future. And we started targeting, looking at Maslow's, to the right, you see Maslow's model of needs. And we looked at, there's kids need to have those physiological needs met, and their safety needs, belonging, all those pieces. And what we did was we literally, as a staff, took this model and we started figuring out what were things that we could do as a school that would actually feed into this model at every step of the pyramid. And so we did enrichment clusters where staff and students got to work together on passion projects that they liked. So a teacher would say, yeah, I'm really big into fishing, and they would kind of make a slide and kids would sign up if they wanted to learn more about fishing. And they actually got to spend time of their school day learning about something that where there's mutual joy and passion. And so we started offering those things to students. We did before and after school programming to help meet kids' academic needs, as well as their social emotional needs. We did staff wellness. We worked on rebranding the school and really kind of bringing it to life. Lots of professional development. We became a character education school and really doubled down on understanding that when we're teaching students about behaviors, when we teach students about everything, including the behaviors, and how do we work kids through emotions that are sometimes bigger than their bodies, and how do we give them what they need to be successful. And one thing that we had started, and it started really small, but became a real cornerstone to the work that we're doing, is we started working with Food Corps, and then we adapted. We went to Farm to School, and we went to the Farm to School Institute. And it really helped ground us in work, because one thing that we noticed is that families were not having equal access to healthy foods. We were looking at the snacks that were coming in with students. We were looking at, and then we were trying to grow our little projects for growing. We were noticing that some kids had no idea about any of the growing process, about what were the essential components that you needed in order to grow things and do it well. And so we started really working on that and looking at the process of food systems and food equity, and how do we create a community that pours back into itself, right? So how do we work together? And so when Jeremy and Cassius were talking, I was thinking about, kind of how we did that same thing within our school. Like, how do we create something, teach it, and then have the students learn it and then bring it home and bring it back in? And so one thing that we know is that economic decline, builds into this cycle, right, of low personal income, lack of access to healthy foods, disease and malnutrition, poor health, and then depleted workforce, and then it's just cyclical, right? And it just keeps building on itself. And then as a layer on top of this, you also have, of course, the, what's happening, in this society where we also have layered structural racism on top of this, right? So we know that some children are being affected in a much different way than others are being affected. And so we really started to work on how do we equalize this for students, and how do we give them opportunities to grow and create, together. And so, for me, gardening really is a metaphor for life. Everything that a child needs to learn about how they're going to be successful in their future really can be attached to, gardening, and what does that look like? And so, you have to have the right conditions, right? Kip was talking about the soil and what do we need to make sure is in the soil. You have energy, right? The sun providing the energy, and in making sure that everybody has what they need. And then you have to nurture things, right? Things don't just grow necessarily on their own. Sometimes you have to help them along. And then harvest is, of course, you take what you work so hard for to create, and you get to enjoy that. But if you take that and you take gardening itself out of that analogy and put in place just being successful with work, career, and life, relationships, right? It's the same thing. In order to thrive, you have to, have the right conditions in your life to thrive. And you're going to have to add some energy, and you're going to have to work to create good relationships. They don't sustain themselves. You have to nurture them, and you have to provide them with everything they need. And then when you kind of put all those pieces together, a relationship pays to you, but you're also giving it to it. So you get to harvest and restart that cycle again. And so we really started to kind of dig in as much as we possibly could to this philosophy and what we did within the school, in every possible way. I mean, if somebody came up with an idea and it fell within our core values as a school and it did these things for students, we embarked on that journey and we did it. And we got really amazing results. We were 2019 Blue Ribbon National Blue Ribbon School, National School of Character. We had increased staff buy-in. We increased our academic performance. One of the symptoms of when schools start to falter is that you get what can be called white flight. Our white population in the school had depleted drastically. And so what really started to happen is it started to balance more, and people started to come back to the school, and we really had a more, a diverse population within the school, which is just healthier for all students, right? It benefits everyone. We learned to collaborate in a really effective way with our families, with our community organizations, with local farms. We really were able to bring in museums, as well as the maritime aquariums, and just as many people who can kind of contribute and pour into our community. We kind of adopted everybody in. And then, for me, one of the most important pieces of this is that students believed in themselves, and they knew the process for success. They knew how they can, set goals and have ambitions and work towards them. And so it really became a great way to do it. And I genuinely feel that much of our work that we have been able to do has been because we've been able to use this idea of growing, ourselves in growing things and connecting with our communities, and having, you know, other people pour into our school systems to kind of help build that knowledge gap that we were seeing, where kids didn't, you know what they were, how they could, you know, eat healthier. Families didn't know. We had families come in and we grew things in our garden. Families came in, we made things. We really tried to make sure that we were also being very conscious of the cultural aspect of the families who we have in our school, so that we weren't just growing, the traditional things that, didn't relate to them, right? We wanted to grow things that people would actually take and use in their homes or in their gardens. One of the cooler things that we were able to do is we were actually able to create little grow kits for every single student in the school. 460 put together. Actually, we made more because we actually sent them to a senior center and had them parallel and grow with us. But we were able to send kits home with every single student and have them, grow at home, start the seedlings off, and then bring them to school and create, a really beautiful community garden where people in the community can just walk in, come in, help take care of it, harvest when things need to be harvested. And it was just a really great builder of community for the school and for kids to see that everyone took pride and wanted to be involved. So in looking for if people are looking for how to help, one thing I would do is to say, if you can advocate for, schools having garden programs, they can be, there are some grants out there and we've certainly written many. But the other thing is, I feel like there are lots of people who have resources or abilities or even knowledge. Kip, you're so lucky I didn't find you then, because I would have loved for you to come in to talk to the kids about the soil and about some of the pieces, that really important information. To be even more scientific, right, and what we're doing and how we were doing it. So if you have resources, including knowledge that can help support a local school system wherever you are within the community, that it's wonderful if you can contact and help and volunteer your time, energy, or resources to help support schools. In my dream, every single school would have a community garden where they can learn these processes and they can kind of do this work together and grow together. So I'm talking fast because I know that we're short on time. I have a short video that just kind of highlights our that last process I talked about with us kind of growing together and having communities be involved. So it's 1 minute long. I'm just going to click on it and let you guys hopefully enjoy, as long as everything works. Fingers crossed. Done. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Teresa, that was just excellent. And, I was just thinking about what incredible creativity and beauty and connection under your leadership. So really a tribute to you and to your work and to your nature, because that's who you are, right? Just creative.
And a good team. And a good team, I have to say.
And a good team. It always takes a good team.
Bar none, yeah, definitely. An amazing team of people who are, when you have a dream, are willing to make it happen, right? So I think anything's possible when you have people who are willing to turn a dream into reality. So it's definitely been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's see, Meg Horrigan is our last speaker this evening. Sorry here. So Meg is the director of Hartford Food Systems, and she is the policy director at she's the policy director at Hartford Food System and staffs the Hartford Advisory Commission on food policy. And coordinates the Connecticut Food System Alliance. I have the privilege of working with Meg on the Connecticut Food System Alliance Steering Committee, and she is one of the kindest, most thoughtful and supportive leaders we have in Connecticut. She is also spearheading the Connecticut Food Action Plan. That is, we will be talking about the Food Action Plan throughout the series. So you will hear more about that, but she has a big job and is just doing really an incredible job. So thank you, Meg, for your time.
Thank you, Allie. That's a really nice introduction, and thanks everybody for being here tonight. Kip and Jeremy and Cassius and Teresa, you've really covered a lot of points that I think would need to be made in a space like this. So I'm going to try to move so we can get to the discussion points, but I wanted to spend some time talking about what motivates the Connecticut Food System Alliance. We work to build connections in the food system, between people like Teresa and Kip, for example, just being able to build out those connections within our food system so that we can all do better work together. So it's really wonderful to hear all of the different partnerships that are going on, like Yukon and the Mashantucket Pequot Nation. So I really appreciate that, but I want to talk about what really motivates us at the Connecticut Food System Alliance and why we take this systems approach so seriously. The first point that I want to make is just that we are at an absolutely crucial point for changing the food system. It's really, I mean, even if United Nations is telling us it's now or never, that's a really big deal. So we're at this crucial point for food system change. There's this swirling combination of wealth inequality and the largest racial wealth gap in the so-called developed world. And all of those things come down to the root of our health disparities and our food insecurity. And we have a long history of treating these symptoms through food pantries and emergency food sources, which are absolutely essential right now, but they don't get to the root of the problem, which is that inequality in the first place. And at the same time, we're failing to meaningfully address climate change. And like I said, the UN is saying now or never. And during the pandemic, we've had a lot of new and innovative policies that were pretty quickly deployed to support people through the pandemic. SNAP, food stamp or SNAP benefits were increased when they've said we couldn't increase them. Direct cash aid was immediately deployed with very little means testing. So this willingness to innovate and experiment in policy, we absolutely need to sustain this energy and urgency and willingness to actually innovate and address these different problems that are affecting our food system. The next point that I really want to emphasize, and I appreciate the amount of the focus on indigenous food ways, that the US food system is built on a foundation of racism. It's built on the subjugation of Black people and indigenous people through enslavement and the stealing of land. And all of these different things continue to have a legacy today in low food access for communities of color, and seeing that like the lowest paying food jobs in our food system are mostly occupied by people of color. And that's had these compounding effects with the coronavirus more hitting those communities harder than white communities. But I don't want to make it too, I don't want to focus on that only one side of it. I really also want to lift up the fact that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have also been organizing resistance to this violent and dominant food system for centuries. There's the Coalition of Immokalee Workers who organized to improve payments for tomato harvesters in Florida. The Black Panther Party initiated a breakfast program, which actually inspired the USDA's school breakfast program. There's literal centuries of this resistance and solutions to the problems in our food systems that are being innovated by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we need to center those strategies and center those leaders in our work. Another narrative that I want to sort of tackle is that the U.S. food system, a lot of people talk about it being broken, and I see and appreciate that perspective because it's really not working for a lot of people. But the food system is working very well for the people who have designed it. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying. They spend billions of dollars in marketing and advertising to make sure that they can keep getting those benefits that Kip was mentioning, this consolidation of power in the food system, offloading those costs onto their workers and onto the land, and not being responsible with their resource management. So that's just, it's not an accident. That is the way that the food system works. It looks broken to us because its main purpose is profit. And because of that, we need to take it and reshape it into something that values nourishment and sustainability over that profit. Again, I mean, Kip really covered the consolidation of the food system. There are just 2 companies in the country that distribute 75% of all the food in the United States. And Kip, of course, mentioned that there's those 4 companies who process 85% of the beef. That's just too few power holders manipulating the food system, and it means that everybody else has less of a voice in our food system. In an equitable food system, we will be able to support more small farmers, distributors, grocers, and ultimately distributing this power more evenly. Kip also covered this, but the price of food, it doesn't reflect the value. And there's sort of this paradox in food systems change that at the same time that there are tens of millions of people in this country who cannot afford food, it is also, the food is undervalued. There's a ton of nonsensical things that go on in our food system. Irrigation of deserts to produce fruits and vegetables for sale, and buying them in more temperate parts of the country. And meat getting raised in the US and shipped out of the US and shipped back into the US to be eaten. Just things that really don't make a lot of sense. And again, it comes down to this consolidation of power. It comes down to the massive government subsidies, which primarily support the CAFOs and corn and crops like that are feeding animals or feeding fuel and not directly supporting people. And it results in mass quantities of cheap and less nutritionally dense food. We've also failed to adequately regulate agriculture, and it's a result, we get all of these unsustainable extractive practices that are ruining our land. And again, the labor of food system workers all along the food supply chain is completely undervalued, and that's how we end up with the cheap food and the cheap food in our grocery stores that doesn't necessarily reflect the costs that a farmer or the land or any person on that food supply chain actually their actual value. And speaking of values, I just want to emphasize that our budgets, government budgets reflect our values. And we are enabling this unsustainable and unethical industrial food system because we're not valuing the right things. And I say we, it's not, that's obviously not an equal accountability, but that's just the pronoun I'm going to use for simplicity. Funding, the budget reflecting our values is also true at the state and local level. For example, our cities will defund schools or try to incentivize Amazon to build a warehouse in their community, but neglect the grocery stores and neglect the farmers markets if they even exist. So we need to see massive change in the way we fund different programs at the federal, state, the federal, state, and municipal level. I don't want to be too doom and gloom because I really passionate about this work, and it's like a love that also drives me to do this work. And I want to emphasize that everybody stands to benefit from a more localized, sustainable food system. We're currently all alienated from our land and food and one another. And an average grocery store or restaurant, nobody there can tell you in all likelihood where a product came from, who grew it, whether they suffered to grow it. And we just don't have that information about our food. We don't have that connection that Cassius and Jeremy were speaking about at the beginning of this panel. If we are lucky enough to be food secure and have good food access, we get to choose between many brands that are often selling the same product and not selling any meaningful information, or actually just selling blatant misinformation, including greenwashing, which is when a company can promote their food as sustainable without actually showing how it's sustainable. But I really wanted to drive home the point that creating more ways for people to wholly participate in our food system, the way the children at Teresa's school get to do, and the way that the children in Jeremy's and Cassius's programs get to do, creating more of those opportunities means more opportunity for meaning and joy in all of our lives, and rebuilding that connection to food and land. I want to just finish with a few things about the Connecticut Food System Alliance. I first wanted to share some of our work is in the regional scope. Because Connecticut is a really small and densely populated state, we won't actually ever be self-sufficient with local food to feed 3 million people. However, if we focus on the wider regional food system of New England, that can help us build more resilience and ensure food security throughout the region. So to that end, we're a partner on the New England Feeding New England project, which is working to strengthen regional food supply chains to ensure that New England produces 30% of the food that we eat by 2030. And that's one piece of the puzzle toward a bigger vision of the Food Solutions New England. Their vision is to produce 50% of the food in New England, eaten in New England by 2060. So what does it take in terms of our diets and land use and all of those, and in our supply chains to actually achieve that vision? So as Ali mentioned, we're coordinating with partners throughout the state to develop a state food action plan that centers food justice. We are the only state in New England without a food action plan. However, we have been learning from the other states through that partnership that I mentioned about food action plans and how to develop them and how to meaningfully engage all of the different partners and individual people and organizations and farmers and people who use food pantries and everybody in the food system to develop our priorities and recommendations for ensuring food access, abundant local food, and thriving farms. I will defer on the contact information. I have a document that I'm sure that Sarah and Ali will be able to share after this. So I wanted to conclude there that that's why we're creating this food action plan. And I will turn it over now with 2 minutes.
Yeah, this was, Meg, that was just excellent. Thank you for that framing. And I feel like this was just such a really just perfect way to begin this discussion with Cassius and Jeremy, and then Meg to end with your comments are just wonderful. And Sarah and I really struggled. This is such a huge topic and such a critical topic, and we really felt strongly that it was probably more important to have the visibility of everyone who spoke tonight rather than a discussion. So, you know, we kind of took that chance. And so here we are at 8:30. But with that, you know, if you need to leave, and, you know, please, we want to honor your time and your evening. And we thank you very much for being here. And we'll be, you know, encouraging you to go back and visit the website, the Greenwich Food System website for upcoming events. But if you're willing to stay for a couple of questions, and if the panelists are willing to stay, we'd love to engage in just a few questions. So we'll move over to the gallery view and open it up for discussion. One of the questions that came up for Cassius and Jeremy is, what tribal programs are available to youth to pass on traditional and sustainable farming practices onto future generations?
So I could answer that a little bit. So we have in the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, they have a lot of different programs. One called the Gifts of the Land, Eyes through the Pequot Child's Eyes. Another one was the Natural World. I mean, so they have this curriculum that's developed to teach in a way that's connecting the youth, the elders, and the natural environment with the importance of, you know, Mother Earth and the gifts that she has to offer through a bunch of different ways of expression, and through developed on a timeline.
Thank you. Okay. Another question that came up for Kip was, hold on here, sorry, now I have to find the question. So there was recently an article about farms in Maine that were affected by PFAS contamination from water treatment and sludge. So has this been a problem in Connecticut?
Yeah, so again, PFAS are those forever chemicals, and we're finding that those are everywhere. So again, you know, probably one of the things that people heard about was at Bradley Airport, because it's in the foam that the firemen use, and it got into the soil, got into the Connecticut River, but it's also in packaging. And so of course it ends up in waste and in sewage treatment plants. And in Maine, they were allowed to spread biosolids from sewage treatment plants on soils on agricultural fields. So when they tested them, they found that it was very high, that the soils were very high in these PFAS. And also when they tested some of the milk from the silage that was grown and fed to dairy cows, it was showing up in the milk as well. So basically there are fields of what would have been excellent prime farmland that are now contaminated, and they're not sure whether they can be restored, whether they're going to be able to do any remediation or bioremediation to be able to treat those soils so that they can be farmed again for food crops of any sort or for livestock feed. So in Connecticut, we were never applied sewage sludge to agricultural fields. You know, probably historically some of it may have been done, but currently it is not allowed. So we don't think that's a problem. And though we haven't tested it, you know, it's possible that maybe the only other thought was, well, you know, from the municipal waste stream of municipal leaves, you know, is it possible from, because it was, you know, coming from urban and suburban landscapes where people may have stored stuff in plastic bags, or there's some plastic bags that ends up in in the leaves, whether or not it's possible, but as far as I know, we haven't actually tested the soils, but we don't think that it's a problem in Connecticut.
Great, that's positive. Teresa, how do you propose we engage schools in food systems as you did at Tracy School? How have you engaged principals in other schools, and what is needed for this to happen, especially in a setting where basic needs are not being met? And maybe you can, touch a little bit more, expand a little bit more on your work with the farm to school institution or institute.
Yes, absolutely. So so the first thing I would suggest is, as building leaders, your building leaders create strategic operating plans, right? You create a plan for how you're going to move your school along. One thing I can say at Tracy is that because we knew that we had a school that was, that had high needs, a lot of high needs students. And one of the common practices, which always blows my mind, is that when you have students who have lack of access to things, what a lot of time people will do is they'll spend an awful lot of time trying to remediate their, if kids need extra help with things. And in doing so, what you're also doing is you're kind of pulling the joy out of the time that you spend with your students. And so we made a conscious decision to focus on enriching the lives of our students versus, just having them kind of, drill and kill to try to get them to gather more knowledge. So when we built our strategic operating plan, what we built in there was how many ways can we possibly add onto their experiences and to build connectivity to their learning, and also give them motivation. And so what I would say is it starts with your plan, right? Because at the end of the day, you take the district's plan and then you find the pieces of the district's plan that connect to your school, and then you build in opportunities. There are several grants and opportunities that are with your food service provider. A lot of our people who helped us with writing some of our initial grants were literally our food service provider was like, oh, hey, there's this grant that you're eligible for if we do this work. And we sat down together and we started doing some of those. But then there's the Farm to School Institute that really is looking at, you apply for it, you send a team out for, and you're supposed to go to Maine. We ended up having to do it virtually because of the pandemic, but you go to Maine and you sit and you work side by side, and your team actually creates that plan for how are you going to put this in your into the work that you do in a meaningful way. We spend a lot of time in schools doing things when it comes to gardening, where it's like these cute little activities where you'd have no actual real interest in diving deep. In making it a real part of your actual curriculum. So the more you can tie it with your curriculum, the more you can tie it to the culture and the climate of your school, and really emphasizing that it's a way to break down barriers for families who are lacking access to these things, as well as a lot of our students didn't have a space in their house. They were living in apartments where they couldn't grow. And so first of all, we talked about growing it, in pots and things like that. But we thought about it. We're like, well, this is getting complicated. And some of the families really were excited and interested, but they didn't have the space to it. And so we thought about these community spaces. The more connected you are with the community and the more that you allow the community into what you're doing, it by default drives in more people interested in the work that you're doing and willing to support the work that you're doing, and also advocate for what you're looking for. It's hard, districts find a really hard time saying no to supporting this when you have the community standing behind you. And so I won't lie to you, I leveraged that pretty ruthlessly to make sure we made sure we made a splash. We made sure we connected with people who love the work that we did. We created a name for ourselves by doing all these things that then gave us leverage to ask for more or to allow ourselves to have the time to do more. And so, you kind of have to be a little bit of a politician, I think, when you do these things, and a little bit of a publicist and a little bit of everything, right? In order to kind of create opportunities. But it's a hard thing to say no to when it's very clear that the rewards for doing so pay off in such a big way. So that would be my starter advice, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you. The last question for the evening here is for Meg, and I think this is a, obviously very important one. Not that all questions aren't important, but why are food networks on a municipal level important to advance the transformation of food on a state level? So why are healthy food networks important?
Yeah, and I know that it had a kind of a high level and not local level presentation, but that is what it comes down to. And so part of my job is staffing the Hartford Advisory Commission on Food Policy, and that is work to do food systems change at the local level. And the answer is just that because our problems are systemic, and because because the problems are systemic, the solutions need to be systemic, and they need to be at every single level. We have to be looking at the city, we have to be looking at the broader community outside of the city, building up those relationships, for example, between farms and then markets in Hartford and Danbury and Fairfield and Greenwich and all these other cities, and creating more of those connections between our farmers. And also, I would say that local food networks are really important for being that voice that I was talking about, of being able to rebalance some of that messaging and actually connecting with the people who are on the ground. And I think that there's just a lot of great things that have come out of food policy councils and networks and things like that, to be able to have a local perspective. That's just really important.
Yeah, and again, we seem to have come full circle with Jeremy and Cash's call to connect and collaborate, right? And that was their call to action, I would venture to say, is to come on up, see who we are, learn from us, and let's learn from each other. Let's visit each other's communities and better understand them. And Sarah, my colleague, Sarah Caccaro from the Greenwich Conservation Commission, again, has just been a wonderful thought partner, and we will continue to really carry that message forth on how we can, here in Greenwich and Southern Fairfield County, really begin to help foster those connections and bridges. And they happen with evenings like tonight. And all of you, our panelists, we seem to have lost Cassius and Jeremy, but all of you have donated your time, and you put a lot of time and effort into making, preparing for this, and then being here for over 2 hours now. And this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for all of you, showing up, and for our guests tonight, for all of you who have come to listen and to learn and to better understand the complexity of these issues. Sarah and I encourage you again to join us on May 4th for Connecticut Grown by Land. We have another incredible panel, as well as June, and then again coming forth in the fall. So stay tuned for that. And lastly, I want to really extend a thank you to our community partners, who I think have done really an excellent job. As I said, we had over 80 people register for this. We are trusting that people will go back and listen to the recording and forward it on, and that this message will continue. And this is the beginning, just the beginning of much deeper conversations. So thank you with all my heart and gratitude. Thank you, Sarah. So have a good night. Bye-bye.